normally at this point you say this man needs no introduction, but given that I'm going to give him one, I can't really claim that. Gabe is, in every industry there are a couple of people who do the missionary work, and they are the people who spread the word that gamification or social games or executive MBAs are a good thing. In all such areas, they serve an important purpose. If we are really lucky, you get someone who actually adds to the thought process rather than just as a cheerleader for the field. Gabe is one such, and he will be publishing his Gamification by Design, which summarizes his book, which summarizes his most current thinking. For this session, he's going to discuss why change is hard, which is describing within an organization or within people, and then he's going to be discussing various behavioral modes that one can incorporate into design. Gabe?
Thanks, Eric. Howdy. So we'll try, I'll try to give you my unique perspective as cheerleader in chief of gamification on this subject, and I think this is extraordinarily important, certainly for me. So as I mentioned, I brought this up yesterday, change is an omnipresent feature of our lives. No matter what it is that we do, no matter what our roles are, no matter what job title we have, no matter what organization we work in, healthcare, the enterprise, marketing, advertising, consumer packaged goods, change is always right around the corner. But one of the truisms, as we unpack and think about the truisms of change, is one that we often say, which is that time marches on. And time is this inexorable number that keeps moving no matter what it is that we do as people or no matter what happens to the planet or the people around us. And if we just if we could go back and ask the people living on Change Alley in London in 1860 and looking at Change Alley now, they would of course see that the passage of time feels immutable. But it turns out that people change pretty slowly over time. They actually don't change nearly as quickly as time moves on. And as I said, change is really hard, which is something that this guy knows intimately well. But when we take a big step up, from our view, our personal view of the world, and start looking at change systems, it looks like change actually happens really fast. This slide right here, courtesy of Ray Kurzweil, is an adaptation of Moore's law, which is that the rate of computing increases exponentially over time. And as you can see, the projection is computers will very soon be as smart as people. We're not very far away from that in terms of overall computer power. So it looks like can be a very exponentially moving change system. But if we blow back out again, if we take one big step up further, looking at another system of change and growth, this time total carbon in the atmosphere in the Earth as measured by ice core measurements and at various observatories, you find that the rate of carbon in the world was pretty stable, for the whole entire time until about 1860. So the system viewed from even higher looks like long period of time with no change, sudden, unbelievable exponential change in the world. And so it's no wonder that when we sit inside of the system at any of these data points along this incredible exponential growth curve, it's hard for us to have perspective as individual people. How could we? Things were so same for so long. So it seems obvious that from a change standpoint, two things are true. One is when looked at as a systems view, when looked from top down, from a broader perspective, change can look exponential. When we all contribute together, change appears exponential. But on our own individual basis, change is perfectly linear. Every time I embark on a process of changing my particular perspective or actions or habits or whatever, it's completely linear for me. The fact that you managed to lose weight by following a particular process may be academically interesting, but I still have to go through all the steps myself. And at the heart of that is a process that we can think of as a process of trying to master things in our lives. And we start at a point of desire, where we say, I would like to change. I would like to have this. I would like to learn Finnish. And so we have this desire to learn, and along the way, there's this process to mastery. And we can look at this process to mastery as a system of discrete steps, which sometimes come in different orders, but include incentives, challenges, achievements, rewards, and feedback that feed our process to mastery. And we also know that by adding a social layer to that process, we can enhance it and make it operate more efficiently. And it's also true that it is actually a loop, Because in most cases, I can't wake up in the morning going, I desire to master this system, ergo finish. And by the end of the day, finish learning finish. So master the process in a single day. So often I have to go through this loop. Incentive, challenge, achievement, feedback, incentive, challenge, achievement, feedback, until I actually master that loop. And we can think of this as a behavioral loop that we go through as people. So a system of thinking about the behavior process that we go through. Now, those of you who are astute game players in the audience will immediately recognize a commonality between this behavior loop and most of the games that you've played in your life, because they have a lot in common. They follow often similar processes. And it is that process that underlies this process to mastery that underlies much of the power of games and gamified applications that have been successful at creating behavior change. Because in order to do it, we have to understand the behavior process and the mastery process and the modification of behavior process. But that's not all they can do. It turns out that actually games change us physically. And one of the main ways that playing games or gamified experiences change us physically is it may actually make us smarter. Interesting research. RNMA 2004, University of Regensburg, gave people the task of learning how to juggle. Controlled group gave people the task of learning how to juggle and measured their brains in an MRI. In 12 weeks' time of learning how to juggle, people's gray matter in their brains increased in a measurable, demonstrable way on an MRI. You could see it in an MRI in 12 weeks. Unreal. And in 2008, they went back and redid the same research and found that the actual cause, so they were looking for the causative effect. Why did this happen? And it turns out it's not how good you are at the game that makes the gray matter increase in your brain. It's the mere act of playing it, of attempting to learn it, that causes the gray matter in your brain to increase. And the reason why this works to a great extent and why games are so addictive, let's say on one level, and so entrancing on the other, is a fundamental biological loop, which is to say, the process of following challenge and achievement releases dopamine in the brain. And that's intrinsically reinforced behavior that when we go through that process, that behavioral loop, whether we're playing a video game or a gamified experience, we are biologically hardwired to respond positively to challenges and achievements, to going through the loop of challenge to achievement. And as I said yesterday, this drug, dopamine, is at the heart of this behavioral interaction. It is why we seek to go through these pleasurable activities like challenging ourselves and being rewarded. That term, gamification, that we've all talked about today, just to recap the definition of it, it's the process of using game concepts, game thinking, game mechanics to engage audiences and solve problems. And it is the transformation of these concepts, the behavior loop, the biology, what works about games, what are fun and engaging, and using them in contexts that are outside of games. But critically, there are two things that gamification is not. Gamification is not simply the application of badges to a crappy website. That will not, and it's not that badges are bad, badges can be awesome, yeah? But if you don't have fundamental product market fit, gamification will not resolve that for you. You cannot use these techniques to make a fundamentally bad experience suddenly fundamentally good. And I think that makes perfectly good sense when you think about it. The second thing that gamification is not is bullshit games deployed in contexts that are inappropriate. And what I mean by that is, gamification is not a rallying cry for most of you in the audience to go out and become a games company. If your business is manufacturing consumer goods that people really love, like beauty care products or coffee or cars or airplanes or what have, this isn't about changing your business from being a car company to being a games company. This is about taking the best lessons from games and using those to your advantage. And so you know me, I'm Gabe Zichermann. I'm the chairman of the Summit, and Eric introduced me. I've written a couple of books, Gamification by Design, Game-Based Marketing. I help a whole bunch of companies apply gamification to their businesses. And we also know that this concept is a big idea. And those of you who are here, of course, have given your time and your money and your intellectual effort to gamification, obviously think that there's something here, but also there's increasing reinforcement that there's something here. And you saw the data yesterday from M2 showing the division of gamification across industry, but also that the direct spend in the U.S. in the next few years will exceed $1.5 billion, which is very exciting. Gartner Group has its own perspective on this. Brian Burke wrote earlier this year in their forecast that 70% of the Global 2000, that is the world's biggest companies, will use some gamified app by 2015. And 50% of all innovation in the world's biggest enterprises will come from gamification. And it's because of this behavioral understanding, because of the positive intrinsic reinforcement of games and gamification, that all of this is possible. This is at its core. Some of our precepts, some of you who have seen me speak before have heard me talk about them, and I want to share just a couple of the basic concepts with you from gamification that I think you'll find meaningful. And the first one, detailed things, and the first one is Bartle's player types. And John Radoff, who follow me, actually has his own perspective on this, which I think is really interesting. And so you'll get a chance to hear a couple of different perspectives on the topic. And certainly in his book, Game On, he talks about them and on his blog. So Richard Bartle was one of the original people to look at player motivation and conducted a series of studies, research on thousands and thousands of multi-player game players in the 1990s and published this research called the player types research. And this is all about the motivation of the player. What drives people to be interested in a particular experience? And for those of you who are marketing or product design people in the room, this is nothing short of revolutionary. This chart should be immediately like, your ears go up. And I know from giving this presentation a few times and talking to a few people about it how interesting this is. This is all about looking at your customer from a motivational and emotional standpoint, not necessarily from a demographic standpoint first. We have a tendency to think about it that way. Who's our customer? Well, she's 30 years old and she makes $27,000 a year and she works as a mid-level, executive. But it turns out that in this new world, in this engagement economy, in which every single one of you in the room competes with Zynga for attention of your customers, and I guarantee you, if you don't already view it that way, you certainly will soon. In this economy, we have to really understand the emotional state of our players. So Bartle came up with a different way of thinking about it. It may not be the definitive answer, but it happens to make a lot of sense to me. And he saw the player types, the motivations, in 4 distinct categories: the achiever, the explorer, the socializer, and the killer. And the core concept is that by understanding these motivations, we can unpack what each one of these people will think is fun. So if I know what your player type is, if I know how you score, I can construct an experience that you will find particularly fun. So how many of you in the audience right now, by a show of hands, without me telling you anything about these 4 player types, how many of you in the audience think that you're an achiever type? Put your hands up. Yes? Okay, so we have like about half the audience put their hands up, which is astonishing. So let me tell you a little secret, achiever people, all of you in the room. You are incredibly, incredibly outside the norm for the population. For 50% of an audience to be principally driven by achievement is very unusual because most of the world doesn't wake up every morning going, today I'm gonna learn about a new thing and like kill it and win and do it, right? And probably the whole time, achievers, the other challenge with achievers, so the first challenge with achievers is you guys, especially those of you who genuinely are achievers, put your hand up, are not normal, number one. And And then number 2 is that it's really super hard to design an experience for the achiever person when we think about their motivation, right? Because imagine those of you who are achievers, imagine the audience right now, I gave you all a challenge. I said, go out, find this thing, come back, and the first 5 people to find it get a prize. And you guys all come back from this challenge, and the next thing that happens, they go, oh my God, you guys are awesome, you're all winners, right? Right? You're gonna go, fuck you, Gabe. That's what you're gonna say. Because that would be inauthentic, because achievers like to win. And if there's not an opportunity to win, an achievement-oriented person, not super thrilled about that, right? So understanding that, that's just one of the 4 player types, understanding that super, super important. And if you're that person, if you're that achiever in here and you're thinking about designing gamification, the first thing that I want you to do is take yourself out of the equation for your design experience. It may turn out that you're principally designing for people like you, but at the very beginning, what I want you to do is tamp that down. Tamp that down for a second. Maybe it's not all about winning. Maybe it's mostly about socializing, which is the majority of the population. socially driven people, people looking for authentic, meaningful social interaction. That is the majority of the population. And if you think about it, no company has ever failed because it was too authentically social, right? And many companies have been very successful at building authentically social experiences. And it's those social reinforcers that are so meaningful. Explorers get their excitement from going out into the world and finding something. The thing itself may be less meaningful than the experience of finding it. It's the person who loves to go and rummage through thrift stores. And when you say, oh my God, that's an awesome thing that you got, the first thing that they say is not necessarily giving you the specs of the thing. It's like, yeah, I found it at this store and it was only $10. Can you believe it? It's their prowess as explorers that drives them forward. And by the way, that's my player type. If you're in the workshop, I'll share it with you, but that's my dominant type, and a little social. And then the last group are killers. Show of hands, how many of you think you're killers? And the audience. I love that you acknowledge that. Okay, we had like 10 people put their hands up, so do not get like locked in a car with any of those people who are in the room. No, it doesn't literally mean that you're like, that you're homicidal. What it means is that you're a special kind of achievement-oriented person who likes to play in a win-lose environment. And those people are extremely important to your community. And this is one critical design lesson I want you to take forward from games into whatever else it is that you do, which is that killers or griefers, the purpose of your design is not to stamp them out. It's not to remove them from your community because they're really, really engaged with your products or services. That wouldn't be a good strategy. And also, they can't be killed easily. They just keep coming back. So the important thing is to drive them in the right way. And the last thing very briefly that I want to share with you before we run out of time is a concept called SAPS that I've talked about before, which is status, access, power, and stuff. And this is a rewards hierarchy that you can use to give your consumers benefits that they'll find meaningful. And the core thing that I want to highlight for you about this hierarchy is that it's in order of most sticky and most engaging to least engaging. And that does not mean that I'm opposed to giving people free stuff as a reward for their actions. I'm not opposed to that at all. If you have the budget to give people free stuff, they love free stuff. But let's be clear about something that's really important and something that we understand from games. When you give somebody something for free, they know exactly what it's worth. And so they value it appropriately, either because they're already your customer or because you have to disclose it. But status, access, and power are things that people have difficulty valuing, so they overvalue them. And that provides you with an opportunity to give people something of tremendous meaning that can be intrinsically incredibly meaningful to them at a much lower cost than handing out free things and giving them discounts all the time. So that's why status, access, and power, and then stuff, are so important to understanding one of the benefits of games. So, in conclusion, I want to say that even though each one of our journeys is individual, every single one of your customers embarks on that desire to mastery loop, passing through incentives, achievements, challenges, rewards, and going through their process to achieve mastery, and each one of those experiences is linear, our job is twofold. The first one is to understand what our objectives are and create alignment from our organizations forward. And also to understand what drives our players, how they pass through that process to mastery, what are the incentives, who are they, what drives them, and to believe that their motivational incentives, that their emotional states are as important, if not more important to design for than their pocketbook. And in doing so, we can move a large chunk of people up that mountain. Thanks very much. I look forward to continuing the discussion with you guys afterward. Thank you.
Gabe, thank you. A very quick question before you go.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned that understanding the distribution of the types of players you have is vital, but how does someone find that out? If you're handed the American Airlines audience, so how do you do it? Is there a discovery process before you go in? What do you have to do?
That's actually a really, really good question, Eric. So the first thing is we don't currently have an easy instrument for figuring this out. So we're working right now with researchers at Cal State to put together an instrument that will allow us to study groups of consumers and understand their player type. So that's still a project that's in process. But in the meantime, the process that we use internally is to delve deeply into their story. the better you understand the player from a story standpoint. What do they do every day? What do they do with their time? What do they love? What do they find engaging? The better that you understand that, the closer you can get to understanding their player type. And that's an experience that we go through in the workshops and that we encourage all of you to go through.
Thank you, Gabe.
Thanks so much.